So please, like I said, this was just a brief introduction. My hope is that please ask questions. I will not be offended by any question that you ask. I would actually feel very sad that if you held back on a question that you really wanted to know about and you really did not get to ask that question. Please. Okay, so we believe. Did you guys hear the question? No? I don't care. Just kidding. Just kidding. So the question is, who was Muhammad? Did Islam start with Muhammad? And if I can say something about him. So we in the Muslim community believe that Islam is not a new religion. We believe that Jesus was a Muslim. We believe that Moses was a Muslim. We believe that Abraham was a Muslim. In that sense, we believe that Islam means to surrender to the will and to submit to the will of God. And as such, we believe that Jesus, Moses were the best of people who displayed and manifested what it means to submit and to surrender to the will of God. God kept sending messengers, and the last messenger that we in the Muslim community believe that was sent by God is Prophet Muhammad, whom we believe is a descendant of Ishmael, a descendant of Abraham through the Prophet Ishmael as well. Prophet Muhammad, we believe that he received revelation when he was 40 years of age. He was in the city of Mecca, nowadays Saudi Arabia, and he kept receiving revelation for about 23 years. And at the end of it, it was this book. We do not believe that he is the author of this book. We believe that he is the recipient of this book. And basically his teachings were to explain what this book is all about. And some of the most beautiful statements that we in the Muslim community have been taught about the great people like Moses and Jesus were actually coming from the mouth of the Prophet Muhammad. And every time we mention their name, we say, peace and blessings be upon them. The Prophet Muhammad said, explaining how he relates to these people, he said, my relationship or the parable of myself and these messengers is like a beautiful building that people kept walking around and admiring the beauty of the building. But everybody notices that there was a small, what is that called? Brick. He said that people would just be walking around and they would say, the building is really beautiful, but there is a brick missing. The beautiful is really nice, but there is a brick missing. And he said, I am that missing brick. So the building is beautiful. He said, now my job is to further enhance the beauty of the building by the installment of that brick. And I happen to be that brick. And this is, his teachings are a collection of books referred to as the hadith, statements of the Prophet, peace be upon him, such as, be under the feet of your mother, meaning that be at the service of your mother, for that's where paradise is. Where the Prophet, peace be upon him, would speak about the idea of just being good to nature and being good to the environment and being good to the people who are around you. So this is what we believe was the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He's not the founder of Islam. He is the recipient of the last message that was sent by God. Sir? Oh.
That's okay. Thank you for your brilliant and very insightful presentation. Would you explain the difference between the Sunnis and the Shiites, those two divisions, and where they came from and how they affect what the Muslims are today?
Okay. So after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, who was the leader of the community of the believers, said that who leads the community next? We had two groups. A community that said the next leader ought to be a person who's qualified to do so. These people came to be known as Sunnis. Sunni literally means tradition. And then there was another group of people who said the person has to be qualified. In addition to that, they also have to be related. They have to be part of the genealogy of Muhammad. They have to be family members of the Prophet Muhammad. And these people came to be known as Shias. Now, initially, that was really the initial difference between the two groups. However, my own personal belief is that these differences were later on exploited for political purposes. And I believe that the worst marriage that takes place is between politics and religion. And when that marriage takes place, you can only have words that I don't want to know about the products of that. When you have an illegal marriage like this, then the result is not a very good one. And what happens is that these differences were later on just made to be very great than what they really are, and they were just exploited. The majority of Muslims nowadays are actually Sunnis. About 80 to 85% of Muslims are Sunnis. Shias are a small minority, about 15%, mainly found in places like Iran, some in Pakistan, some in Afghanistan, in Kuwait, and in Iraq at this point. And sadly nowadays, there's just a lot of sectarian violence that is taking place between these Sunnis and Shias. Part of what I do is that I do mental health assessment for refugees. And a good number of these refugees coming from places like Iraq, I would see a husband and a wife. The husband is Sunni, the wife is Shia, or the wife is Sunni and the husband is Shia, and say that we have different kids who are married to Sunnis and Shias. Our own parents are Sunnis and Shias. And they said, look, man, we've lived in Iraq for all of our lives. We actually did not know who was who. It did not make any difference to us as who was who. We lived in a great deal of peace, but now this idea is so exploited for political gain. Even though it is religiously clothed, but they say that it's got nothing to do with religion, it's got everything to do with politics. Please. Sorry.
I'm impressed by what I've heard so far. I have a rather pointed series of questions. And I would like the question answered according to the Quran and question or answered according to what you believe, okay? And why do you allow female circumcision? And why do you allow prepubescent marriages? And why do you allow multiple wives in marriage?
What was the second question?
Multiple wives in marriage.
And the one before it?
Prepubescent marriages.
Okay. All right. So the first question is female circumcision. That is not part of Islam. That is just part of cultural traditions. Within the Muslim communities, there are only two places that actually practice this. And sadly, it is where I come from, Northeast Africa. Eritrea, Ethiopia, the Sudan, some parts of Somalia, and some parts in Kenya. Outside of this area, you will not find this practiced anywhere. In these areas, female circumcision is practiced both by Muslims as well as non-Muslims. That is cultural and it is not religious. Even though many times people may religiously, they would want to justify their practices religiously, there is nothing religious about doing something like this. Like the Jewish community, male circumcision is something that is done within the Muslim community, but the female circumcision is not something that is promoted in the name of Islam, but that is very localized, like I said, in Northeast Africa. As far as polygamy is concerned, I come from a background where polygamy was very common. I have 26 aunts and uncles. My mother has 26 brothers and sisters. There are 105 of us as far as the grandchildren are concerned. And that's a small family, by the way. So polygamy is popular in these areas. And we do not believe that this is something that is peculiar to the Muslim community. If you look into the Old Testament, many of the patriarchs were also polygamists as well. So was Moses and was Abraham and so on. Polygamy in Islam is allowed, it is not necessarily mandated. There is a really nice study, James Q. Wilson, who is a sociologist from UCLA. He wrote a book on the problem of marriage. And what they were looking at is that there is actually a problem in marriage. There is something called the sex ratio at birth, and then there is sex ratio at the time of marriage. Sex ratio at birth, usually you have 107 boys to 106 girls. Sex ratio at the time of birth is higher for boys than it is for girls. However, later on, the sex ratio at the time of marriage is actually higher. It's a low sex marriage, meaning that there is less number of men than there are women. People being in the military, more men complete suicide, even though more women attempt the suicide, more die in car accidents, more men die in wars, and what have you. And what you do is that you look into, well, what's going on at the sex ratio now? Well, it depends which city you're talking about. The worst city to be a female looking to get married in the US is, anybody take a guess? What would be like the worst city, like you won't get married if you go there? Actually, Atlanta, Georgia. Okay? Atlanta, Georgia is one of the worst places to be at. Very good place, sex ratio is actually the San Jose area, Silicon Valley. A lot of men there, a lot of engineering, a lot of, and so on. Well, then they look into countries. Give you an example of a country like Djibouti. Djibouti is in the Horn of Africa. And what happens in Djibouti is that 50% of the males have actually left the country to look for jobs. Well, what does that do to the rest of the community there? So in many of these communities, polygamy is the answer. So polygamy in Islam is allowed. It is not mandated. It is something that people may choose to practice in parts of the world, and they are culturally very acceptable as well. Can you do this in the US? What can you do? You can actually, in the US, you can legally cohabitate, meaning that you can be married and be legally cohabitating with somebody else. How many people? There is no limit. So that is something that is actually legal in the US. You can actually cohabitate legally with somebody else while being married to somebody else. But that would be an understanding. The other idea of marrying off young women, that is also a very common charge. So to give you an example, my mother got married when she was 14, and my father was 19 when he married my mother. And that is the case around my mother's generation. That was the case. You've got to remember, though, where my mother comes from, the life expectancy was at 42. The shortest life expectancy nowadays in the world is in Swaziland. Swaziland is a country within a country in South Africa. It used to be Zimbabwe. The life expectancy there is at 32 years of age, 32.9 to be exact. So now what happens is that when you look into these people and they're getting married at the age of 14, oh, now I get it. Because see, the idea is that most of these people are not going to make it beyond their 35th birthday. I'm not saying this to say it's okay. What I'm saying is that you've got to consider something else beyond, that person being that specific age in order for us to, make a sound conclusion about this. Now, does it happen that sometimes people are really, really young and they got married? Yes, it does. Remember, my thing is that I like to defend the book and not the behavior of the people. The behavior of the people may or may not be in sync with the teachings of the book. So yes, in some Muslim cultures and non-Muslim cultures in places like Africa and Asia, sometimes people have gotten married at some very, very young age. Like you said, pre-puberty, and that is not acceptable. Marriage is a contract in Islam where a person has to have the ability of consent. Children do not have the ability to consent at that point. What is the age in the US here? How young do you have to be married? 16, yeah. Legally? Good. Technically speaking, there is no minimum. If you look into the laws in California, there is no minimum. The state does not dictate how young you can be to get married. However, it's a different story when you go to court. So in court records, the youngest is in Vermont, 13 years of old. You can actually get married, 13. But the boy has to be 13, the girl has to be, and you have to have parental consent. Not really the point. But the idea that people marrying off children, that is just, it may be practiced out there, but that is very un-Islamic. Meaning that the book does not say that it is okay to marry off children at that age. Well, somebody can ask, but wait a minute. I just heard something about the Prophet Muhammad. He married a girl that was how old? 7. Some people say that she was 9 when he married her. And many of the charges that we hear is that pedophilia. Look at him, a 50-year-old man marrying somebody who is 7 years of age. And these are the kind of misconceptions and teachings that are out there about the Prophet, peace be upon him. His wife, Aisha, they say that she was 7 or 9, and that is not true. She was actually 19 when he married her. But then again, these are things that sometimes you would even hear amongst the Muslims themselves that people might be saying as well. So polygamy is allowed, not mandated. Female circumcision is cultural, it is not religious. And the idea of marrying off children, that is part of the cultural practice, not religious mandation. She's closer to the mic. Okay, sorry.
There's a perception, I believe, that in the Islamic faith, that women are somewhat subjugated or perhaps denied an education, or just not given, equal opportunities as to men. Would you speak the truth of that situation, please?
Sure. And this is what we call a marvelous case of schizophrenia. When you consider the issue of women in the Muslim world. I'll give you a quick example. So the most populated Muslim country in the world is Indonesia, 400 million Muslims. Prime Minister is a woman. Second most populated Muslim country in the world is Bangladesh, 160 million. Prime Minister is a woman. She's actually a handicapped woman as well. The leader of the opposition is also another woman. Third most populous Muslim country is Pakistan. The Prime Minister was a woman. Fourth most populated Muslim country in the world is India. Prime Minister was a woman. So you've got over 500 million Muslims ruled by 4 powerful women. So you say, good job, Muslims. I mean, look at you, you did that. Yeah, but see, in Saudi Arabia, a woman cannot drive a car. So you say, wait a minute, what do you mean? 60% of college students in Iran are actually females. In the US, it's at 58% of college students are females. So you say, good job, look at that, educational opportunities. Yeah, but see, in Afghanistan, girls can't really go to school. Well, in the Jordanian parliament, there are more female parliament members than there are in the House and the Senate combined here in the US. So you say, good job, participation, political participation for women. Yeah, but see, in places like Kuwait, women cannot really vote. Well, which one represents you? Depends on where you're looking at. Really depends on where you are looking at. But you are right about the impression that people have out there. That impression, I believe, results from 3 things. The images that we see in Afghanistan. If you are a woman, you have to be out and you've got to be wearing your burqa and you cannot leave. And if you leave not dressed like this, we will do 1, 2, and 3. But man, Afghanistan is just one single small place, compared to the rest of the Muslim world. So we've taken that and we've painted an entire picture of what the rest of the Muslim world looks like. Here's what we believe in. Number 1 is equality in creation, meaning that men and women are created from the same substance. You know the idea of, this is in the book of Genesis, of how Eve was created from the rib of Adam. That is not there in the Quran. It says that men and women are created from the same substance. Number 2, equality as far as God's expectations of men and women. God does not expect more of women than he does of men, or vice versa. There is no favoritism as far as God is concerned. Number 3, as far as personal accountability between men and women is absolutely very equal in the Quran. However, having said that, the practices of the people are not necessarily a reflection of the Quran. So I can say, America is a Christian state. What does that mean? That it reflects Christianity in everything that they do? Not really. You know that every 24 seconds in the US, there is a woman who is being abused. She's either slapped, kicked, somebody's spitting on her face, somebody's shoving her, calling her name. That is one every 24 seconds. That is what is going on. And you look into this and say, what does that reflect? What reflects the culture that the people are in? So the case may be that in some of these places, yes, that is the case. They speak about who gets medical attention when people get sick in places like Pakistan. Said that most likely the boys will be taken to doctors, but not the girls. Well, why is that? Find out that's actually economics. The girl is the guy, the boy is the one that is working. And what happens is that his health is very important to the rest of the family. And the family cannot afford. So when they choose to take the boy to the doctor because it is that boy that is supporting the rest of the family. I'm not saying this to excuse the behavior. And I'm not saying this that there is a justification or an explanation to it. I'm just letting you know what is going on. So you are right about the observation that this is something that happens within the Muslim culture, but that is not necessarily because of the teachings of Islam. Good question. Yeah. Yeah.
Will you speak to the ideas of beauty, sacredness, and the freedoms of the burqa, or the veil, or the chador?
Good question. So as far as the dress code is concerned, in Islam there are actually guidelines that, you know what, modesty and decency is expected both of men and women. However, like the rest of the teachings of the Quran, when it comes to rituals, well, let me put it this way. The Quran says that there are two types of authorities. There is an authority that is legal authority, governmental authority, and then there is the authority of the conscience. All rituals, personal obedience to God, they lie under the authority of conscience, not under legal authority. Meaning that these are things that you do willingly, if you choose to, and if you choose not to, nobody can force you to pray. Nobody can force you to have a relationship with God. So as far as that is concerned, that is something that you choose. I have 5 sisters. Been blessed to have 5 sisters. Some of my sisters, they choose to wear, and some of my sisters choose not to wear, for example, because that is just something that is personal freedom. And the idea here is that it is a reflection of modesty, it is a reflection of decency, and like I said earlier, that is done, or like we're not the first to do this. Catholic nuns, that is what they look like. In ultra-Orthodox Judaism, a good, ultra-Orthodox Jewish woman, she either wears a wig or she wears a scarf. Up till the 1960s and 70s in the US, if you were to go to church on Sunday, most of women would either be wearing a scarf or they would have, their big hats. It's in the book of Romans. And St. Paul, he spoke about how women ought to be when they come to church. So we in the Muslim community do not believe that anything that we do is novel or new. We believe that it is carrying a legacy that has actually started from before. So an expression of freedom, she either wore it or she did not wear it, an expression of obedience to God, and it is an expression of decency and modesty. Can we take all the questions so that I want to make sure that everybody got a chance to ask their question? She's bringing the microphone.
Hi, thank you very much for being here. It's very insightful for us. I'm going to be a little more pragmatic about it, though. ISIS and its different groups like it are a perversion of Islam. You said that. I think we all agree with that. What is the Islamic community in whole doing to dissuade, bring ISIS down, defeat it? And other than saying that it's a demonic part of Islam, I don't really see any activity being done by the community to defeat that particular portion of Islam.
Very good. Thank you. Somebody in front of you. Thank you. Did you want me to answer the questions, or I just want to make sure that I respect the time here. All right. So what is the community doing about ISIS? Remember that the most victims of ISIS are actually the Muslims. When ISIS goes around and kills people and beheads people, most of the people who are killed, the people who are beheaded, are actually Muslims. And what happens here is that what ISIS does is very sensational. It grabs the attention of the media. A gathering like this, there is nothing sensational about it. I love this gathering. I honestly, really, really do love this gathering. But this is not sensational. What is sensational in the media nowadays is that if it bleeds, it leads, man. That's how the news comes. Like, what's the first item? It's usually just bad stuff that happens. People gravitate towards something like this. So one thing is that we believe that ISIS is getting all the attention. It's getting all the media attention. So what happens is that we believe that ISIS is an ideology that needs to be defeated ideologically speaking. And as a result, it's not just about denouncing it. It is about making sure that every argument that ISIS brings is actually eradicated. It is invalidated. It is deemed to be an illegitimate ideology or an idea. And we do this at the mosque. You know, when they do say, or somebody is being killed because they have converted or they left Islam, immediately our talks out there are going to be, you know what you have heard out there, what they have argued, and what is the counter argument for this. It is being done, and it may not be as creative, it is not be as marketable, it may not be as intense as it ought to be, but man, it just gets so unbelievably sickening. In our own mosque, for example, we have a school, and I just be speaking about access for like a month. Some of our young students, like second grade, they just went to the principal and said, why are all the sermons around violence? Well, you know, in a way here, I am responding to what is going on, but unfortunately, in the process, I am depicting this image now that we're trying to run away from, but now these kids are picking on it and say that, man, why are we talking about ISIS all the time? Why are we addressing ISIS all the time? We are all ears for ideas. So part of what we did here at the Mission Viejo Mosque is that, look, people have this misconception about Islam and believe that every one of us is just an ISIS waiting to happen. So we invited the leadership in the community, the spiritual leadership in the community, and I gave a similar presentation as far as where we stand. But I agree with you. More needs to be done. What's just being done so far is not good enough. So they need to be defeated ideologically. They need to be defeated militarily. They really need to be wiped out. And the hope is that political stability actually is going to be part of the process that would defeat somebody like ISIS. But as long as that disruption that is taking place in places like Iraq and Syria and what have you, there is just a lot of desperation in that part of the world. You're talking about some of the youngest people live in that part of the world. A country like Tunisia, 65% of the population is under 30 years old. No jobs, unemployment, graduates with no jobs. What do? Place like Egypt, 90 million people. And again, speaking about unemployment, lack of opportunities, a place like in the Middle East, it's a very rich place, yet 25% of the population live under poverty lines. So people look into the resources, they consider what is going on, and unfortunately many times an ideology like ISIS becomes appealing. Not because it's good, but you know what, in situations like these, people really do not want complex, complicated ideas. You know, the problem is 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, I agree with that, and just go and join. So we believe that the war to be won is actually the ideological war. You know what, that's very difficult to say, but political stability would definitely enhance the opportunity to do something like this. Good question. I am okay, so as long as the people are okay. Yeah.
First of all, I want to thank you for being here and sharing this with us. I have two very separate questions. The first one is, when we were in Egypt, we had a wonderful Muslim tour guide, and we talked for hours, and she said her goal was for every Muslim to go to the Mecca. Can you tell me more about that? And then I'll ask my next question.
Okay, so Mecca, we believe that Mecca is a city in Saudi Arabia. It's about 12 by 12 kilometers, and a Muslim is required to go to Mecca once in a lifetime for the pilgrimage. What makes Mecca significant is that there is a building in Mecca called Kaaba, the cubicle, and we believe that it was built by Prophet Abraham, and it was the first house that was dedicated to monotheism. So part of keeping the legacy of Abraham alive is that for a person who can financially and physically afford going to Mecca, they would have to at least make an attempt to go there once in a lifetime. Whenever Muslims pray, we are facing towards Mecca. We're not facing towards the east. Depends on where you are, but you try to face towards Mecca. And again, what you're trying to do is that you're trying to orient yourself towards the way of Abraham. So that becomes the wish of every Muslim to go to Mecca. It is really nice to go to Mecca, and sometimes people have got a lot of religious passion and they want to fulfill it at the expense of anything. So what they found out is that older Malaysian farmers were selling their land, they were selling their cows, leaving their children in poverty because they really wanted to go to Mecca. So the government looked into this and they say, yeah, we understand the passion. even though you really have to be in financially sound position to make a trip like this one, and most people don't go because it really is expensive. So what they came up with, like, it'll be like some sort of a loan process that you can come through. But the dream is really for many people there is that I really want to go there one day in my life.
Thank you. Next question I have a harder time with. I'm original from Holland, the Netherlands, and we've had many incidents there where we were told by the Muslims that they want to take over our country, as well as Belgium. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So the case in Holland, if you remember the cartoons that were drawn of the Prophet Muhammad, first they originated in Holland, and what was he? He was killed there. What did he do? He was an editor of a newspaper, I believe, or the newspaper editor who was killed in France as well. Well, what I told people about the cartoons is that cartoons are nothing but a ink that was put on paper by an idiot, but worse than that, idiot is the one that killed him for it. That's really what they were. Put by an idiot, but worse than that, idiot was the person who killed him for it. Europe is some sort of a peculiar situation there, and by no means, I'm defending any of that. Just trying to explain. In the U.S., it's very easy to become an American. If you speak English with no accent, then where are you from? I'm from LA. End of the story. In Europe, if you do not look European, you will always be a non-European. So what they're finding out is that minorities in Europe have a hard time being part of this. A good number of people who come from Holland, from Northeast Africa part, places like Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, and then also some people also coming from Turkey. And what happens is that these are people who are coming from areas where there is a lot of political oppression. And when they come there, sometimes just disconnecting the self from where they have come from is very difficult. So, voices like these take place. Or we're coming here to, change Europe. We're coming here to take over Europe. We're coming here to... And remember that a great deal of people who lived in the Middle East, people who come from Africa, the idea that they have of Europe is that these are the colonialists who actually came here, raped Africa, they raped Asia, and one day we're going to make them pay for what they have done. So these are some of the images that people have, and these are some of the ideologies that consume people as they are painting their picture of the other. And again, please, by no means I'm saying that this is excusable or this is, I'm not offering an explanation to justify. I'm just saying that this is what is being believed out there. And yes, sometimes people do really make these statements. My hope is that they would mean the following, is that we as Muslims, when we come to places like Europe, when we come to places like America, we see some of the problems that are out there, and these problems are really not ours to curse, but they are ours to fix. If that's what they mean, then I would say that's really good. But if what they mean is really about domination, about changing people's lifestyles, then I would say that's just mere stupidity.
Again, thank you and welcome. My question is, what would you ask of us?
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we've done number one, and that is opening your doors. When I say this, and I come talk to people, my job is not to convert or to convince people. My job is to convey a message and create a sense of understanding. We cannot peacefully coexist if we do not know each other. We live in one of the most beautiful, diverse places on planet Earth. But that diversity has to be celebrated. And in order for genuine celebration of diversity to take place is that we have got to know one another. On our part, I believe that we have failed in introducing ourselves to the community. So we let groups like ISIS introduce us to the rest of the world out there. So I would say that that's something that we deeply regret. We wish that we had done a better job in reaching out to the people out there and introducing ourselves to them. Because ignorance breeds fear. And with the images that come from that part of the world, the images are not very good. So they even enhanced that fear even further. After 9/11, this young girl is watching TV with her mother and she sees the planes diving into the World Trade Center. She said, "Mom, why did they do this to us?" She said, "Honey, it's because they hate us." "Mom, why do they hate us?" "Honey, it's because they don't know us." She said, "Mom, can we just write our names on a piece of paper and just give it to them?" It sounds childish, but it's very true. Ignorance really, really breeds fear. And what we're hoping for is that in order to eliminate that ignorance, we just say that to eliminate the fear, we've got to eliminate that ignorance. And the way that we do it is it'll just be settings like these. You do not know how much I love these types of settings. This is just really beautiful. It's, you know what, look, man, I do not agree with the image that's being painted about myself and my community out there by groups like ISIS. Can I please have the opportunity to introduce ourselves? And you say, you know what, why not? Come on over. You know, we'll just do this to you. So to me, this is really, really important. That's number one. And number two, I would say just be an ambassador, not just to the Muslim community. I mean, many people out there, it's not just about us. In order to really have a good community, I say, let's just dispel all the myths and the conceptions about all the people out there. Be it the Latinos, be it the blacks, be it the whites, be it the Asians, be it the homosexuals, be it the men or whoever is out there, you know what? Let's just do something about that so that we can collectively say, we may not agree with what everybody does out there, but the least that we can do is just get to know them so that we can celebrate our diversity. Secondly is, if you can really help us in reaching out to more places like this, you know, we say that this is a very slow process, but this is the surest process. It's not about, you know, somebody just appearing on TV. No, man, it's just about personalizing it. It's about, you know what, people sitting here and people talking and people saying, can I come and visit over at your mosque? I would love that. Can I bring my family, my church, my group? You may be a member of a club. You may be, you know, I'd say, we would love to come and visit. So thank you for that. Thank you for that question. And that would actually be, that would be wonderful. Bringing teenagers together, you know, having different groups, that would be lovely.
And the other thing we're doing also, and just opening the possibility on our website to give it unique.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you.
That was a great question and answer. I don't know if I can follow that or not. I just have two quick ones. If Islam and Muslim, is that interchangeable words or are they different? And if they're different, you can explain. And the martyrdom that we hear about and the 40 virgins, is that something that's in the Quran or?
I love it. Okay, good. So now what happens is, as far as Islam, so the name of the religion is Islam, and a person who adheres to the religion is called a Muslim. So I call them saying Christianity and a Christian. Christianity being the name and a Christian being the follower of Christ, peace be upon him. And sometimes people say that the Muslims believe this versus Islam really says that. So it really depends on how it is used. As far as martyrdom is concerned, suicide bombers, you know, why do they do it? They do it because they want 70 virgins in heaven. I mean, have you heard that before? You know, and that just sounds like very, very simplistic. You know, just look into this and say, really? Somebody would actually do that for 70 virgins? Are you kidding? And you just look into it and say, I believe that it really is a very silly way to respond to a very complex question. Give you an example. Robert, his name escapes me. He writes a book called Dying to Win. That's actually the name of a book where he studied suicide bombers from 1984 all the way to 2001. And he found out that in that period, where do most suicide bombers come from? Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Middle East. Most suicide bombers actually come from Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka. It's a small island at the very tip, southern part of India. Most suicide bombers come from Sri Lanka. And they are part of a group called the Tamil Tigers. The Tamil is that province out there. They're called the Tamil Tigers. They are the ones that invented the suicide belt. Sri Lanka has given the world more suicide bombers than any other part of the world. But here's the thing. They don't believe in God, and it is not a religious ideology. In fact, Sri Lanka, that is where the highest ranking elected official was killed, Rajiv Gandhi. He was killed by a female suicide bomber, Batu. He is visiting there, and it was part of his campaign. She comes in, and they have these stories because in Sri Lanka, they celebrate these people, and they document every single part of their life prior to them carrying out that behavior. So, she went, she bought a new dress, and she's just very calm, and she's very peaceful. She meets with Rajiv Gandhi, pretends that she dropped something so that the impact will be bigger when she got up, pulled her suicide belt, she killed herself. Rajiv Gandhi, the Prime Minister of India, and along with him, she killed the cameraman that was making sure that everything is documented, and then they find out that that same girl, 6 months prior, was raped by 7 Indian soldiers. And what that Robert Papes is the name, he did, is that he studied all these people, all these suicide bombers, finding out that the first suicide bombing that took place in Lebanon back in 1982 was actually carried out by a woman who happened to be Christian. The first suicide bombing mission that took place in 1994 in Palestine-Israeli conflict was actually done by an American medical doctor from Brooklyn, New York, Baruch Goldstein. Hebron, April, he went there while people are praying in the mosque, and he took his AK-47 and he killed 29 people, wounding 42 people, and then he was beat to death. And he is a Jewish man, very dedicated Jewish man, a medical doctor from our own backyard here in Brooklyn, New York. What Robert Papes found out is that only 23% of suicide bombers were actually motivated by religion. The rest of the people were motivated by an ideology. Oh, you didn't know this before, did you? The idea that most suicide bombers come from Sri Lanka, that's not where it came from. Okay? So you look into this. Never mind though, there is that element within the Muslim community that believes in martyrdom, that they believe that they will get all these virgins in heaven. But you look into a concept like this and you say, that is really, really silly. Because martyrdom is not just about killing people, even though the first documented case of suicide mission is actually in the Bible. Remember the story of Samson? What does he say when he pulled the pillars? What is the end of the story? They said, and in his death, he killed more people than when he was alive. That was a suicide mission right there. Okay? In any case, so now what happens is that martyrdom is really not about it is about a person dying so that somebody else may live. These people, what they do is that I'm just going to die and take as many people down with me as possible. You look into this and say, that is absolutely silly. What they're finding out nowadays in Iraq is that they're using people who are mentally retarded to drive cars into crowded areas. They're using people to drive cars and they have no idea that the car is actually got bombs in them. But then it comes out as, there was a suicide bomber that was in it. Now, speaking about the 72 virgins or the 40 virgins or what have you, in Islam there is actually a concept of hell and heaven, and it does speak as to what happens to you if you were to go to heaven. So what is part of what is available to you? So the most common repeated reward in heaven is actually peace of mind. People are going to have peace of mind in heaven. That's what you will get. In the Quran, 53 times, it says that no grief, no fear you shall have. Mood disorders, it's all about being sad about what went wrong yesterday, potentially being worried about what can go wrong tomorrow. So we become either prisoners of our memories or we become captives of our imaginations, too sad about yesterday, too worried about tomorrow, and we miss out on living today. So it says, you make it to heaven and you get to enjoy every single moment there. Part also of what is promised in heaven is that you will have a partner. And that partner is not referred to as the virgin partner, but they refer to as a viceless partner. And interestingly, the Quran speaks a lot about Jesus, And it speaks also about the disciples of Jesus. No names are given, just only one description is given about the disciples of Jesus in the Quran. It is the same description that is given to the partners in heaven. And that is Hawariyin, people who are viceless. Now you know that in sort of Christology, they're talking about Jesus being a member of the Essenes. And these are people who are studying and they really, really lived a good moral life. So the Quran speaks not of virginity, but the Quran speaks of decency. You make it to heaven, and you know what, if you were to make it to heaven, you will be paired with somebody who is viceless. So when we hear about, people really going into a suicide missions, and it's really about 72 virgins that they're looking forward to, you look into this and you say, man, that is really not the case. Because there are just other people who have done this, and, the 72 virgins were never part of that. Yeah, but like I said, people misuse and abuse religious texts all the time. People, I am so unbelievably grateful for this invitation, and let me tell you, I am hoping that this is not the end, but rather this is a beginning of a very good relationship. And really, really appreciate it. Thank you.